This is my first son.
My uncle raised me like his own son for 18 years. He fed me from his own plate. He paid my school fees before he paid his own sons. He called me my first son in front of the whole village. But the day a multi-million-naira compensation offer for my late father's land finally came through, that same man looked at me like I was a debt he wanted to collect and then throw away. If you have ever loved someone who turned around and treated your love like a weapon against you, stay with me till the end of this story. Because what my uncle did to me and what I eventually did back is not something you see coming. And if stories like this move you, hit that subscribe button now, because trust me, you don't want to miss what happens in the middle of this one. My name is Ikenna. That was the name my father gave me before he died, and it means the strength of the father, which is somewhat funny because for most of my life, I did not feel strong. I felt like a guest in somebody else's house, smiling because I had nowhere else to go. I was 5 years old when my parents died. My father, Namdi Obi, was a quiet, hard-working man who owned a small parcel of land near Port Harcourt, land that everybody in the family said was sitting on gold because an oil company had been sniffing around it for years, offering small money that my father always refused. My mother, Ijoma, sold provisions in the market and sang while she swept the compound every morning. I remember her voice more than I remember her face. That is the cruelty of losing your parents young. The details melt away and only the feelings remain. They died in a car crash on the Port Harcourt-Owerri Road, a night of heavy rain, a truck driver who dozed off, and a bend in the road that swallowed my whole world in one moment. That is what I was told. That is what everybody told me. For over 20 years, I believed it completely, without a shadow of doubt, the way a child believes the sky is simply blue because someone told him so. After my parents died, there was a big meeting in the family compound. I don't remember it, I was too young, but I heard about it many times over the years, told and retold like a legend. My uncle Obinna stood up in front of the elders and said something that made every woman in that room cry. He said, "My brother's blood is my blood. His son will not suffer while I'm alive. I will raise Ikenna like my own son, and nobody will treat him like an orphan in my house." And for a long time, Uncle Obinna kept that promise. That is what makes this story painful. It is not the story of a wicked man who was wicked from the beginning. It is the story of a man who was good, and then something changed him, or maybe revealed what was hiding underneath him all along. I grew up in Uncle Obinna's house in Enugu alongside his own son, Kelechi, who was exactly my age, born only 4 months apart. We were raised like twins, same school uniform, same bowl of soup sometimes, same bicycle we fought over on Saturday mornings. Uncle Obinna's wife, Auntie Nika, was stricter with me than she was with Kelechi, but I told myself it was because that was simply her nature, sharp-tongued but fair. She would scold me for coming home late for football, but she was the same woman who sat by my bed for 3 nights when I had malaria so severe the doctor said I might not survive it. For years, I did not know the difference between myself and Kelechi in that house. Uncle Obinna paid our school fees together at the same time from the same envelope. He took us both to his shop on Saturdays to learn how to keep records. He would put his hand on my shoulder in front of visitors and say, "This one, my brother's son, he has my brother's brain. Watch him, he will be something." I used to swell with pride when he said that. I thought I was the luckiest orphan in Enugu. But if you have lived long enough, you will notice that people show you who they truly are in small moments. Moments so small you convince yourself you imagined them. I remember one evening, I must have been about 12. I woke up to use the toilet and I heard Uncle Obinna and Auntie Neka arguing in low voices in their room. I was not trying to eavesdrop, I promise you. I was simply walking past their door. I heard Auntie Neka say, "That land in Port Harcourt is not small, oh, Obinna. When that boy grows and remembers his father's papers, what will you tell him?" And I heard Uncle Obinna's voice, cold in a way I had never heard before, say, "By the time he grows, I will have handled everything. Face your front and stop asking me useless questions."
I did not understand what that meant. I was 12. I thought maybe they were talking about selling some family land to pay for something the way adults did. I went back to bed and I forgot about it, the way children forget most things that frighten them quietly. There is something you must understand about my father's land. It was not just bush and grass. It sat close to a flow station, and an oil company had been trying to acquire land along that corridor for a pipeline expansion for over 15 years. My father had refused every offer while he was alive because he said the money they were offering was an insult, and he was waiting to negotiate properly or pass the land to me when I was old enough to negotiate myself. After he died, the land officially belonged to me, his only child, held in trust, they said, by my closest surviving relative, which was Uncle Obina, on paper at least. In practice, for 18 years, nobody talked about that land at all. It was like a sleeping snake in the corner of the room that everybody agreed not to mention.
I finished secondary school with good grades. Uncle Obina was so proud he bought a goat and killed it for a small party. I remember him standing in the middle of the compound, holding my report card up like a trophy, telling the neighbors, "You people should watch this boy. He will carry this family very far." Kelechi did not do as well as me academically, and I always felt a small guilt about that, because I could see in flashes a kind of tightness in Uncle Obina's jaw whenever people compared us. But he never once said an unkind word to me about it. If anything, he pushed harder for me. He said I should study accounting at university because I was sharp with numbers like my father was. I went to university in Nsukka. Uncle Obina paid my fees every single session, sometimes selling small things from his shop to make up the balance, or so Auntie Neka would remind me, in a tone that always had a small blade hidden inside it. "Do you know what your uncle is sacrificing for you?" she would ask, and I would nod, grateful, feeling the weight of a debt I did not fully understand. It was during my 3rd year in university that I met Chichi. She was studying microbiology, sharp-tongued, unimpressed by my attempts to be smooth, the kind of woman who could see straight through a lie before it finished leaving your mouth. We became friends first, then something more. I told her everything about my life, about my parents, about Uncle Obina's kindness. She listened to all of it one evening, sitting on a bench outside the faculty building, and then she said something that stayed with me for years. She said, "Ikenna, kindness that comes with no explanation eventually asks for a receipt." I laughed at the time. I thought she was being dramatic. I did not know she was about to be proven right in ways that would break something inside me. I graduated with a good degree. There was another small party, smaller this time, because things in the shop had not been going too well, Uncle Obina said. I did not question it. I did my youth service in Kaduna, came back, and started looking for work in Enugu, staying in the family house because that was still home to me, the only home I had ever truly known. It was around this time, about 2 years ago, that things began to shift, slowly at first, so slowly that I kept explaining it away. The first thing I noticed was that Uncle Obina started asking me questions he had never asked before. Innocent questions on the surface. "Ikenna, did your father ever give you any of his old documents before he died? Do you remember your mother mentioning any papers, any files, anything like that?" I found the question strange, but not alarming. I told him truthfully that I remembered nothing. I was 5 years old when they died. What would I possibly remember of documents? Then, one Sunday afternoon, I came back from church to find 2 men in Agbada sitting in our parlor with Uncle Obina drinking Fanta from our good glass cups, the ones reserved for important visitors. When I walked in, the conversation stopped so suddenly, it was like someone had cut a wire. Uncle Obina introduced them as business associates, and the men smiled at me in a way that made the hair on my arms stand up, a smile that measured me like a tailor measuring cloth he intended to cut. One of them said, almost too casually, "So, this is the one, the son of Nnamdi Obi?" Uncle Obina answered quickly, too quickly. Yes, my brother's son. But don't worry, everything concerning that matter is being handled." I asked what matter they were discussing.
Uncle Obina waved his hand and said, "Nothing. Small business. Go and rest. You must be tired from church." I went to my room, but I did not rest. Something in my chest had started to tighten, the way it tightens when your body understands a threat before your mind has caught up. 2 weeks later, Kelechi, my cousin, my brother in every way that mattered, came to my room late at night. He was unusually quiet, sitting on the edge of my bed, turning a biro over and over in his fingers. "Ikenna," he said, "has Papa spoken to you about the land in Port Harcourt?" My heart did something strange. "What land?" I asked, though something in me already knew. Kelechi looked at the door before he spoke again, lowering his voice. "Your father's land, the one near the flow station. I heard Papa on the phone last week. He was talking to a lawyer about transferring it into a company name. Ikenna, that land is yours. It has always been yours. I don't know why Papa is talking about transferring it."
I could not sleep that night. In the morning, I confronted Uncle Obina gently, respectfully, because even in that moment, some part of me still believed there was an innocent explanation. Because this was the man who raised me, the man who bought a goat for my report card, the man who called me his first son. Uncle Obina's face changed when I asked him about it. It was subtle, but I saw it, a flicker, like a mask slipping for half a second before being pulled back into place. "Ikenna," he said, his voice suddenly very smooth, very rehearsed. "You are asking me this now, after everything I have done for you? I was going to explain everything to you when the time was right. There are processes, legal processes. You would not understand them." I told him I was not a child anymore. I had a university degree. I could understand processes. His eyes hardened, just subtly, just enough for me to notice. "Since when do children question their fathers?" he said. And that word, father, which had once felt like a gift, suddenly felt like a leash. I want you to sit with me in that moment, because that was the moment everything started to crack open. Before you continue with me on this journey, if this kind of story, the kind with layers, the kind where nothing is as simple as it looks, is the kind of thing you enjoy, please subscribe to this channel right now. Because what I discovered after that conversation is something I still have trouble believing myself, and I promise you it gets far more complicated from here. I did not let the matter rest. I started asking questions quietly, the way you learn to move when you suspect the ground beneath you might not be solid. I went to see my mother's younger sister, my auntie Uju, who lived in Aba and rarely visited us because, according to family gossip, Uncle Obina and her had never gotten along. I had always assumed it was simple sibling-in-law tension, the kind every family has. I was wrong. Auntie Uju was surprised to see me standing at her gate, grown, a man now, with my father's exact walk, she said, tears filling her eyes immediately. She fed me before she would let me ask a single question. That is our culture. You do not discuss serious matters on an empty stomach. But once the plates were cleared, I asked her directly, "Auntie, what do you know about my father's land? What do you know about Uncle Obina's relationship with my father before he died?" Her face changed, the way water changes when a stone drops into it, ripples of memory and old pain moving across her features. "Ikenna," she said slowly, "are you sure you want to open this door?" I told her yes, I needed to know. What she told me next rearranged everything I thought I understood about my own life. She said that in the months before my parents died, my father and Uncle Obina had been fighting, not the small brotherly disagreements every family has, but a real, bitter conflict. My father had discovered that Uncle Obina, who was managing a portion of his transport business at the time, had been quietly diverting profits into his own accounts, siphoning money meant for the family business for nearly 2 years. My father confronted him. There was a huge quarrel.
Auntie Uju said my mother told her, just weeks before the accident, that my father was planning to cut Uncle Obinna out of the business entirely and had even begun speaking to a lawyer about it. Your father was not just going to remove him from the business, Auntie Uju said, her voice trembling now. He told your mother that he was going to expose him to the whole family, to the elders, so that Obinna would carry the shame for the rest of his life. Ijoma told me this herself, Ikenna, 3 weeks before they died. I sat there frozen, my glass of water halfway to my mouth. Auntie, I said carefully, are you saying what I think you are saying? She would not answer directly. She looked down at her hands. I'm not saying anything I cannot prove, she said. All I know is that your father was about to destroy your uncle's reputation and take away his access to the family money. And 3 weeks later, your father and mother were dead, and your uncle became the man raising their only son, holding all their land, all their assets in trust for a boy who was too young to ask questions. She looked up at me then, and her eyes were wet but steady. I'm not accusing anybody of anything, Ikenna. I'm only telling you what I know and letting you decide what to do with it. I left her bar that evening, feeling like the ground had opened beneath my feet and I was falling through 18 years of memories, watching each one twist into something new. The goat killed for my report card, the school fees paid on time, the malaria nights when Auntie Neka sat by my bed. Was all of it real kindness, or was it maintenance, the way you maintain something valuable that you plan to use later? I did not confront Uncle Obinna immediately. I needed proof, not suspicion. I'm not a reckless man. I did not want to destroy a relationship, even a complicated one, on the strength of one grieving woman's memory of a conversation from 18 years ago. So I did something Chichi, now my fiancé, helped me plan carefully. I began quietly gathering documents. I visited the land registry in Port Harcourt myself, using my father's old file number, which I found among a small box of his belongings that Auntie Uju had kept safe for me, unknown to Uncle Obinna all these years. That box alone was a small miracle, a box he did not know existed, filled with my father's old letters, his handwriting, his voice trapped on paper. In that box, I found something that stopped my heart completely. A letter my father had written but apparently never sent, addressed to the family elders, dated 11 days before he died. In it, my father laid out in his own careful handwriting the exact accusations Auntie Uju had described: financial diversion, betrayal, a formal request for a family tribunal to strip Uncle Obinna of any further involvement in the family business. At the bottom of the letter, my father had written one more line that I have never been able to forget. If anything happens to me before this matter is settled, let it be known I feared for my family's safety because of what my brother is capable of when cornered.
I do not know, to this day, whether my father's fear had any connection to the accident that killed him. I want to be careful here, because I promised myself I would not turn suspicion into accusation without proof. And there is a difference between a man who is capable of betrayal and a man who is capable of murder. What I can tell you is what happened next, and you can decide for yourself what you believe. Armed with the letter and with the land registry documents showing that the land was still legally, entirely in my name, held only in guardianship, not in ownership, I finally went to Uncle Obinna. Not to accuse him of anything about my parents' death. I was not ready for that conversation. Perhaps I will never be ready for it. I went to confront him about the land, about the 2 men in Agbada, about the lawyer Kelechi had overheard him speaking to. I found him alone in his shop late one evening, counting money at his small wooden table the way he had since I was a child. He looked up when I walked in, and something in his face told me he already knew this conversation was coming. Perhaps he had known for weeks. "Uncle," I said, placing the folder of documents on his table, "I need you to explain something to me. Why are you trying to transfer my father's land into a company name without my knowledge?" His face did not fall the way I expected. Instead, it hardened, quickly, completely, like water freezing in a single breath. "You have been going around asking questions.
Who have you been talking to? Uju? That woman has hated me since the day I married into this family. Answer my question, uncle, I said, and my voice shook, but I did not back down. He stood up slowly. In 18 years, I had never seen him look at me the way he looked at me in that moment. There was no warmth left in his eyes, none at all, only calculation, the look of a man deciding how much of the truth he could afford to spend. Sit down, he said finally, and I sat, because some habits of respect do not disappear even when your heart is breaking. You want the truth? Fine, I will give you the truth. He told me that after my father died, the compensation negotiations with the oil company for that land had continued quietly for years, and just 8 months earlier, the company had finally agreed to a settlement figure so large it would change several lives at once. A figure that included years of backdated fees, right-of-way payments, and a lump sum for full acquisition of the corridor land. He told me the money was sitting at that very moment in an account controlled jointly by the family lawyer and himself, waiting for final paperwork. Paperwork designed, I realized as he spoke, to give him control over how much of that money I would ever actually see. You think I did all of this for nothing, he said, his voice rising now, all pretense gone. You think I fed you, clothed you, trained you in this business for 18 years for love alone? Do you know what it cost me to raise another man's son alongside my own? Kelechi has suffered because of you, Ikenna. Every kobo I spent on you was a kobo I could have spent building something purely for my own child. I am not sorry for wanting something back. I am not sorry. The room went silent. I remember hearing my own heartbeat in my ears. Everything I had built my identity on, the goat killed for my report card, the pride in his voice when he introduced me to visitors, all of it collapsed in that one confession. And yet, somehow, part of me almost respected the brutal honesty of it, because at least, finally, I was hearing the truth from his own mouth. So, all of it, I said quietly, the school fees, the parties, calling me your first son, it was never love, it was investment. He did not deny it. He simply looked at me and said, everything has a price, Ikenna. Even love, especially love. I want to pause here, because this is the moment everything truly shifted, the moment the story you thought you understood reveals itself to be something else entirely. Before I tell you what happened next, and trust me, what happened next is not what you are expecting, take a second, hit that subscribe button if this story has gripped you so far, because the resolution to all of this involves someone you would never have suspected, someone whose loyalty was tested in a way that almost broke an entire family. I left the shop that night without another word. I could not speak. I walked through the streets of Enugu for almost 2 hours, past the roasted plantain sellers packing up for the night, past Okada riders calling out for passengers, and none of it registered. My phone was buzzing constantly, Chichi, worried, calling again and again. I finally answered somewhere near the stadium roundabout, and I told her everything, my voice breaking apart with every sentence. She told me to come to her place, and I did. She sat with me the entire night, not offering empty comfort, but asking sharp, practical questions. Ikenna, does he actually have legal power to transfer the land without my consent? I told her I did not think so, based on what I had read in the guardianship documents, but I was not certain. Then, tomorrow, we go and find out properly with a lawyer who has no relation to our family. The next few days moved like a fever dream. Chichi's cousin, a young lawyer named Sam Okoro, agreed to review everything I had, the guardianship papers, the letter from my father, the land registry documents. He confirmed what I had hoped and feared in equal measure. The land was legally mine and had been mine since the day I turned 18. Uncle Obina's guardianship over it had technically expired years earlier. He had simply continued managing it because I never knew to ask otherwise, and because the family lawyer, it turned out, was his personal friend from secondary school, a man who had been quietly helping him for years, filing paperwork that made the arrangement look more official than it legally was. But here is where the story takes a turn I never saw coming.
2 days after my confrontation with Uncle Obina, Kelechi came to find me at Chichi's place, something he had never done before, arriving unannounced, his eyes red and swollen. I braced myself, thinking he had come to defend his father, to beg me to let the matter go quietly for the sake of family peace. Instead, he sat across from me, silent for a long moment, and then he placed a small flash drive on the table between us. "I have been recording him," Kelechi said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Recording who? Your father?" Kelechi nodded, and then the story poured out of him, a confession that changed everything I thought I understood about who the villain of this story truly was. He told me that nearly a year earlier, he had overheard his father on the phone with the same family lawyer, discussing not just the land, but something far darker, something Kelechi had been too afraid to tell anyone, afraid of what it would mean for his own father, afraid of destroying his own family. He told me that his father had once, in a moment of drunken anger nearly 2 years ago, said something to his mother, Auntie Nika, something Kelechi had overheard through a thin bedroom wall. His father had said, "If Namdi had listened to me and taken this small money quietly instead of threatening to expose me to the elders, none of this would have happened the way it happened." Kelechi said his mother had gone completely silent after that statement, and the argument had ended abruptly, in a way that felt, to a frightened teenage boy listening through a wall, like the sound of something too terrible to name. "I don't know what he meant, Ikana," Kelechi said, tears now falling freely. "I have never known for certain. Maybe it means nothing. Maybe he was just talking about the business betrayal until you told me about. But after your parent died in that accident, Papa changed almost overnight, from a struggling transport manager to a man who suddenly had capital to expand the shop, to build this house we grew up in. I always told myself it was because he finally inherited some family land of his own. I never wanted to ask the real question because I was afraid of the answer. I sat there, absorbing this, feeling something cold settle in my chest, a truth too large and too dangerous to hold all at once. I asked Kelechi why he had started recording his father. "Because 3 weeks ago," he said, "I heard him on the phone with those men, the ones in Agbada. They are not business associates, Ikana. They work for a company that specializes in exactly this kind of thing, helping people quietly acquire land rights from unsuspecting or absent heirs, taking a cut for making the paperwork disappear cleanly. I started recording because some part of me knew, even before you confronted him, that he was planning to steal your inheritance completely, to make it look legal, to make it disappear before you ever fully understood what you had lost." He pushed the flash drive toward me. "This has everything. His conversations with the lawyer, his conversations with those men. I am not doing this to destroy my father, Ikana. I am doing this because you are my brother. You have always been my brother in every way that has ever mattered to me, and I cannot watch him do this to you and call myself a good man if I stay silent. I want you to understand what this moment meant, because it is easy in a story like this to divide people cleanly into heroes and villains. But real families do not work that way. Here was a son choosing truth and justice over blind loyalty to his own father, knowing full well what it might cost him, knowing his mother might never forgive him, knowing his father's name in that community might be destroyed forever because of what he was about to do. That takes a kind of courage I am not certain I would have had if our positions had been reversed.
We took the flash drive to Sam, the lawyer, the next morning. What was on it was even worse than Kelechi had described. There were recorded conversations of Obina's voice instructing the family lawyer to backdate a transfer document, to claim I had verbally consented to a company arrangement I had never once been told about. There was a recording of one of the Agbada-wearing men explaining in chilling detail how they would structure the deal so that only 15% of the total compensation would eventually reach me, structured as a gift from a grateful guardian, while the remaining 85% would be absorbed into a shell company Obina and the lawyer jointly controlled. There was one more recording, the one that made Chichi grip my hand so tightly it left marks. In it, Obina's voice, tired, almost regretful, saying to the lawyer, "I am not a wicked man. I raised that boy with my own hands. But a man cannot spend 18 years building nothing for his own children, while another man's son inherits everything on a golden plate. Namdi would have destroyed me if he had lived. I am simply finishing what circumstances started." I am simply finishing what circumstances started. I have turned that sentence over in my mind so many times since that day. I still don't know exactly what it means. I have chosen not to pursue an investigation into my parents' accident, not because I lack the courage, but because I have come to understand something important. Some truths, when you can't fully prove them, will only poison the rest of your life if you chase them without end. What I could prove, what was undeniable, recorded in his own voice, was the theft, the deliberate, calculated theft of my inheritance, the betrayal of a promise he made to a room full of elders 18 years ago.
With Sam's guidance, I did not go to the police immediately. Instead, I did something that I believe honored both my father's memory and the complicated love I still, despite everything, carried for the man who had, in his own broken way, raised me. I called for a family meeting, the same kind of meeting that had been held 18 years earlier, in front of the same elders in the same compound. Uncle Obina did not know what was coming. He arrived expecting, I think, another quiet negotiation, another chance to smooth things over with his usual charm. Instead, he found the compound filled with elders, with Auntie Uju, who had traveled from Aba the moment I called her, with Kelechi standing beside me instead of beside his own father, a positioning that told the entire gathering everything they needed to know before a single word was spoken. I played the recordings. I read my father's letter aloud, his unsent warning from 18 years earlier. I watched Uncle Obina's face crumble in front of the same community that had once celebrated him as a hero for taking in his brother's orphaned son. Auntie Neka sat frozen throughout, her hands trembling in her lap, and when the recordings finished playing, she did something I never expected. She stood up, and in a voice that shook but did not break, she said, "I suspected. God forgive me. I suspected for years, and I said nothing because I was afraid of losing my own comfort. I am sorry, Ikenna. I am truly sorry." The elders were merciless in their judgment, as they should have been. They stripped Uncle Obina of his standing in the family council, a punishment that, in our tradition, carries a weight far heavier than any court sentence, a public unmaking of a man's honor in front of everyone who had ever respected him. They ordered the immediate, full, legal transfer of every asset connected to my father's land back into my name, with Sam overseeing the process to ensure no further tricks could be attempted. The lawyer who helped Uncle Obina was reported to the State Bar Association. Sam made sure of that personally, refusing to let a fellow professional's corruption go unpunished simply because it was inconvenient. I did not press criminal charges against Uncle Obina. I want to be honest with you why. Because I know some of you watching will disagree with my decision, and that is fair. I chose mercy, not because he deserved it, but because I decided a long time ago, sitting in Chichi's parlor that terrible night, that I did not want to become a man defined by revenge.
I wanted the truth exposed, the theft reversed, and then I wanted to walk forward into a life he no longer controlled. That does not mean there were no consequences beyond the elder's judgment. Word travels fast in Enugu, faster than any newspaper. Within months, Uncle Obina's shop lost most of his customers, quietly, the way disgrace spreads through a community, through whispered conversations at the market, through neighbors who no longer greeted him with the same warmth. Auntie Neka eventually left him, moving to stay with her sister in Onitsha, unable to continue living beside a man whose name had become synonymous in that community with the betrayal of an orphan he swore before God and elders to protect. Kelechi stayed in Enugu. Our relationship, remarkably, grew stronger rather than weaker through all of this because I understood deeply that he had chosen truth over blood, chosen me over the comfort of silence, and that kind of loyalty does not disappear when a family fractures. If anything, it becomes the one solid thing you can build on when everything else has collapsed. I used a portion of the recovered compensation, once everything was finally settled, to help Kelechi start his own business, a small logistics company that has since grown into something he is genuinely proud of, not out of guilt and not out of obligation, but because that is what brothers do for each other. And despite everything, despite discovering he was not truly my blood, Kelechi remains to this day the truest brother I have ever known. I married Chichi 11 months after that family meeting, in a small, quiet ceremony that Until Ju cried through from beginning to end. I used part of my inheritance to build a modest house, not the mansion some people expected me to build after news of the settlement spread, but a solid, comfortable home, because I had learned through everything that happened that money built on someone else's tears never truly settles peacefully in your spirit unless you handle it with humility. I set aside a portion, a significant portion, for a small foundation in my parents' names, helping other children who lost their parents young navigate the legal complexities of inheritance, because I never want another child to grow up as blind to the truth as I did for 18 years. As for Uncle Obina, I see him occasionally, from a distance, older now, quieter, a shell of the confident man who once held my report card up like a trophy in front of the whole compound. We don't speak much. There's a strange kind of peace in that silence. Not forgiveness exactly, not yet, perhaps, not ever fully, but an acceptance that some relationships once broken by greed cannot simply be repaired by time alone. I do not hate him. I have tried to hate him and I could not sustain it because somewhere inside the man who betrayed me, there was also the man who sat up with me for malaria fevers as a child, who taught me to ride a bicycle, who genuinely, in his own complicated, ultimately corrupted way, loved me for a long time before greed found the cracks in that love and widened them until everything fell through. That's the lesson I carry from all of this, the thing I want to leave you with tonight. Love that is real does not require a receipt. It does not calculate what it is owed in return. If someone's kindness towards you comes with an invisible ledger, sooner or later, life will show you that ledger, usually at the worst moment possible, usually when you can least afford to be surprised by it. Watch how people behave when money enters the room. Watch what happens to kindness when it is tested by opportunity. That's where you will find the truth of a person's heart, not in the years of comfortable love, but in the single moment when love and self-interest are forced to compete and one of them has to lose. If this story touched something in you, if it made you think about someone in your own life, a person whose love you have never quite trusted, or a person who taught you that family is not always about blood, please subscribe to this channel before you go. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it tonight. Because somewhere out there, someone is living inside their own version of this story, right now, wondering if they're imagining the coldness they feel creeping into a relationship they once thought was unconditional. Trust that feeling. And when the truth finally comes, as it always does, may you have the courage, like I did and like Kelechi did, to choose truth over comfort and to walk forward into your own life free.